In the thick forests way up in New York, 143 hidden graves were found in 1862 under the wooden floor of an old, empty church. The local cops wrote down that every skeleton had signs of terrible torture-broken bones that had healed before they died. There was proof they'd almost drowned many times, and strange carvings were cut right into their bones. For over 160 years, the government kept all records about the Church of the Pure Spirit, secret, only shown to top-level people. I got my hands on papers that no one outside the government had ever seen, papers that tell the full creepy story. It talks about three brothers, Elder Ezra, Deacon Silas, and Prophet Caleb Ravencroft, who started something truly messed up. They made hundreds of people believe that suffering was the only way to be saved, and it led to a horrifying cult. The little town of Ravenwood in upstate New York wasn't special at first, just a quiet place in the early 1800s, tucked between big hills and thick woods. About 40 miles north of Albany, around 300 people lived there. They mostly farmed, cut trees, and traded with nearby towns to make a living. The town got started in 1803 by people moving up from the Hudson Valley, looking for good land and a fresh start. Like many places in upstate New York back then, Ravenwood was right in the middle of something called the Second Great Awakening. That was a time when people across America were going wild for religion. Especially in the early 1800s, the area got called the Burned Over District because religious groups were popping up like wildfire. Old churches were being questioned, and new ones were starting, led by preachers who could gather thousands in outdoor sermons. Right in the middle of all that, in the summer of 1825, the Ravencroft brothers showed up in town. Elder Ezra, the oldest at 42, had a strong presence. He looked like someone used to being in charge. His deep-set eyes looked black and certain. Light, and it felt like he could see your soul when he spoke about God. Deacon Silas, 39, looked more like a bookworm-thin fingers, glasses and ink stains from always writing religious stuff. Prophet Caleb, the youngest at 35, had this weird vibe. People were drawn to him, but also a little creeped out. He talked in whispers you could still hear across a crowded room, and his pale blue eyes would roll back during visions. The brothers had money, and they bought a big piece of land just outside town right away. They quickly started building something they called the Church of the Pure Spirit. It didn't look like the normal white churches in the area. This one was made of dark stone from nearby hills. The design was strange, an 8-sided main room in the middle, with 8 smaller rooms all around it. The steeple was super tall, weirdly tall for such a faraway place. But the oddest part was the main room had no windows at all, just lanterns, lighting things up during services. "We were sent here by the Spirit," Elder Ezra said during the first service, which a lot of curious locals came to. "In a time full of fake prophets and lazy faith, we bring the real truth, purification through pain." He said the Spirit told them this town would be the place where a new way of thinking would be born. The brothers showed up at just the right time. People were confused about religion in 1825 America. Old churches like Episcopalians and Presbyterians were losing people to newer, more emotional churches. Methodists were growing fast with preachers on horseback, bringing fiery sermons to small towns. Baptists were rising too, focusing on personal conversions, and new American faiths were popping up fast. The Mormons would start just a year later, less than 100 miles away, when Joseph Smith released the Book of Mormon in 1830. In that kind of spiritual chaos, the Ravencrofts found people who were ready to listen. At first, their teaching seemed simple. Real salvation only came through pain. It burned away sin. They quoted the Bible, talking about being refined by fire and how Jesus suffered on the cross. But they took it literally, not just spiritual pain, but real, physical pain to cleanse your soul. "The body holds sin," Deacon Silas would calmly say in his early sermons. "So the body must be tested, pushed, and purified through suffering." Only when the body is broken can the spirit rise. Their group grew bigger during that first year. But they didn't let just anyone in. You had to go through a meeting with Prophet Caleb first. He decided if you were ready to be purified. They mostly accepted 3 types of people: the very poor looking for family, the troubled looking for forgiveness, and the rich bored with regular religion. Margaret Wilkins was one of the first to join a widow who lost her husband and 2 kids to scarlet fever last winter. She'd been thinking of ending her life when she met Elder Ezra in town. He looked at me like he knew what I was thinking, she later wrote in a journal the feds found. He told me my pain had meaning, that it was preparing me for something greater. For the first time since I buried my family, I felt something besides sadness. By 1827, the Church of the Pure Spirit had about 100 members. Some lived in simple houses near the church. Others still had homes in town, but spent most of their time at the church. The Ravencrofts told members to give up their money and land to the church, saying those things kept people from growing spiritually. The most loyal followers became what they called vessels of the Spirit. That meant going through tougher purification like fasting for days, praying all night, and ice-cold water rituals that symbolized drowning the bad self. Outsiders didn't realize how slowly but surely the brothers were turning things up. Little by little. Like the saying about the frog in hot water, people didn't notice how bad things were getting. By 1829, they started building a big system of rooms under the church, and by then, the brothers had total control. They owned their followers' minds, their bodies, and their choices. Everything was ready for something really dark to begin. At the Church of the Pure Spirit, Prophet Caleb was said to have told his brothers in a private talk years later, "The flock has been gathered. Now it's time to begin the real work of the shepherd." But Ravenwood was about to find out the brothers didn't mean protecting the flock. They meant sacrificing them. Things went from strange to horrifying on one specific day, December 21st, 1829. It was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. That night would later be called the First Ascension in secret church papers. It was the beginning of all the terrible things that came after. That day started with Elder Ezra telling everyone that Prophet Caleb had a big vision the night before. Everyone in the group had to come to the church for what was called the next step in purification. As night fell and it got freezing cold, around 150 people packed into the windowless church. It was lit only by 12 big candles, each one placed at a point of a huge carved pattern on the floor. The pattern was a spiral leading to a small platform in the center of the room. Thomas Hartford, a blacksmith who had joined 6 months earlier after his wife died, later escaped and told what happened. He said Elder Ezra spoke with more passion than usual, shouting with energy. Ezra said their earlier suffering was just the beginning, just preparation for the real cleansing. "Brothers and sisters," Ezra yelled, "we have been gentle until now, leading you toward the truth. But the Spirit grows tired of waiting on us," Elder Ezra said. "Tonight, Prophet Caleb has been shown the real path to salvation, one that needs more bravery than we've asked before." Just then, Prophet Caleb walked out from one of the side rooms. People said he looked completely different. His skin was super pale, his movements stiff and jerky. His eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites. He started talking in what he called the angel's language, weird growls and high-pitched wails. His creepy sounds echoed all around the church. After doing that for a few minutes, Prophet Caleb suddenly dropped to the floor. When he stood back up, he talked in his regular voice again, but it had this rhythm and power that drew people in. He said the Spirit had picked 3 people from the group for a special honor, the First Ascension. He named them Sarah Pembroke, Michael Collins, and Rebecca Winters. "The Spirit has chosen you," he said. "You are worthy of rising." All 3 were newish members of the church, and Deacon Silas led them to the center platform. "What happened next?" Hartford said. was something I didn't think could happen in a decent, civilized place. Each person had their clothes taken off, down to their underclothes, even though it was freezing. Then they were tied up on big wooden frames shaped like upside-down crosses. Elder Ezra told everyone that flipping the Holy Cross wasn't evil. It meant turning from pride to humility, from comfort to pain, from life to death, then finally rebirth. For hours, the Ravencroft brothers put those three through what they called the 7 trials of purification. First came the trial of air. Wet cloths on their faces while water was poured over them, making them feel like they were drowning. Then the trial of earth. They were packed in dirt from the church grounds up to their necks, buried alive for short bits. Next was the trial of fire. Hot metal was pressed quickly onto their skin, burning shapes into their bodies. The trial of water came after that. They were dunked into freezing water again and again until they passed out, then brought back. Hartford said he could barely keep watching during the last 3 trials. He threw up and nearly passed out himself. But what is clear from his and others' stories is that during all this, the victims were told to accept their pain as holy. Every time they screamed, the rest of the church was told to chant, "Through suffering comes purity. Through purity comes elevation." The worst part, Hartford said, was how the others reacted. Some cried softly or looked away, but a lot of them stared with joy, like they were watching something holy. The Ravencrofts had trained these people to see pain as something good. And now, all that brainwashing was paying off in the worst way. As morning came and the 7 trials were finished, the 3 people hung limp in their frames. They were barely awake, almost unconscious, but still breathing. Elder Ezra said their sins had been completely washed away. He told everyone they were now ready to be filled with the pure Spirit. Then something happened that would haunt everyone who saw it for the rest of their lives. Prophet Caleb walked up to each of the 3 and put his hands on their heads. He whispered something into their ears. No one could hear exactly what. Hartford and another witness later told the police what happened next. Suddenly, all 3 bodies shook hard, their backs arched so much that bones cracked loudly. Their eyes flew open red, wide, and bloodshot, and they all started speaking in that strange, fake angel language Caleb had used earlier. By the time the sun came up, all 3 were dead. Elder Ezra said they had successfully ascended. He told everyone their souls were now so pure, they went straight to heaven, no judgment needed. Their bodies, he said, were now holy and should be treated like sacred objects. They weren't buried. Instead, the 3 bodies were taken to one of the new rooms under the church and laid out on stone slabs. People in the church could come and pray near them, asking for the same kind of elevation. Later, the government took church records showing that these 3 were just the first. Over time, there would be hundreds of dead bodies stored in the catacombs beneath the Church of the Pure Spirit. The morning after that first ascension, a few church members quietly packed up and left town. Thomas Hartford was one of them. But he didn't talk about what he saw for years. He thought no one would believe something this evil could happen in Christian America. The people who stayed behind became even more loyal to the Ravencroft brothers. They were now fully committed to the twisted belief system. The brothers had now crossed a line. What they were doing was murder, dressed up like religious ritual. But instead of losing power, they actually gained even more control. Inside the Church of the Pure Spirit, death was no longer a tragedy, it was a holy act. Prophet Caleb was heard telling his brothers after the ceremony, this came from a church elder who later told the truth. We showed them the real face of God and they didn't look away. There's nothing they won't accept from us now. And he was right. The first ascension wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. For the next 30 years, worse and worse things happened behind the church's innocent-looking front. From 1830 to 1845, the Ravencroft brothers worked on making their methods more polished and spreading their power. They built a belief system that explained the killings as holy. And they also figured out better ways to carry them out. They kept things looking normal on the outside. Their church talked a lot about helping others, building community, and spiritual growth. Those ideas fit in perfectly with the religious movement going strong across the burned-over district. They even joined public events, sometimes letting other preachers speak or giving money to good causes. They donated to groups like orphan homes and alcohol reform clubs. But under all that good PR, the truth was much darker. The underground rooms under the church started as small cellars, but were soon turned into a big system of tunnels. The first builders were local workers, but eventually only trusted church members did the digging. Later, only the most loyal followers, called vessels of the Spirit, were allowed to help expand the underground system. By 1835, those tunnels, called catacombs by church leaders, had 7 big rooms and lots of smaller spaces. Each room had its own role in the creepy religion the brothers created. There was the chamber of preparation, where people stayed alone for days before their elevation. Then the chamber of trials, where the 7 tortures happened. Then the chamber of ascension, where the final rituals killed the person. And worst of all, the chamber of saints. That's where the dead bodies were kept. Keeping the bodies became a huge part of the cult. Instead of burying the dead with respect like most religions, the Ravencroft saved the bodies. Some were kind of mummified, done by Deacon Silas, who studied old medical books. Others were cleaned to just bones using strange methods investigators later couldn't even figure out how. The bodies were arranged in scenes throughout the Chamber of Saints. Some were posed like they were praying or feeling joy. They even used wires to hold their bones in place. Elizabeth Carver joined the church in 1832 and got out in 1844. She gave one of the clearest descriptions of those awful rooms. "The smell was the first thing I noticed," she told government investigators. "It didn't stink like rotting, it smelled like strong chemicals. There was turpentine, alcohol, and something sweet I didn't recognize. The brothers said it was a holy scent, but I later found out they were just embalming chemicals." People were slowly introduced to those hidden rooms. First, they just heard about them as symbols, nothing too real. Then, they were allowed to peek inside the less creepy parts. Finally, the most loyal ones got to watch or even help with the rituals. "It was all done slowly and carefully," Elizabeth Carver explained. "By the time you saw the Chamber of Saints full of arranged corpses, you were so brainwashed it felt beautiful, not horrifying. I remember crying what I thought were holy tears," she said. "The first time I was allowed in there. Now I feel sick just thinking about it." Over time, these elevation rituals happened more and more often. In 1830, church records show only 2 ceremonies and 5 people died. By 1835, they happened 4 times a year, each killing 2 to 4 people. And by 1840, they were doing them every month. Special dates like solstices and equinoxes claimed even more lives. At first, the Ravencrofts picked people with no close family. They chose widows, orphans, and loners, people no one would miss. But later, when they felt untouchable, they picked from loyal families too. They said giving your child to the Spirit was the highest kind of faith. Carver remembered, parents used to fight over it, begging for their kids to be chosen, like it was a huge blessing. "Now it makes me sick." The 3 brothers kept their usual roles on the outside. Elder Ezra was the bossy one, deacon. Silas was the bookworm, and Prophet Caleb was the one with creepy visions. But privately, things changed. People who used to be close to them said Prophet Caleb got stronger over time. His visions started guiding more and more of the church's decisions. By 1840, Caleb picked who would be elevated and how it would happen. But his mind wasn't doing well by then. Journal entries found in his secret room showed crazy writings. Mixed in were detailed sketches of human bodies. One note from 1842 said, "The Spirit showed me that souls aren't just in the heart or mind, They're in parts all over the body. Every time someone's elevated, I can find more of those spots. I'll soon map the entire divine body. By 1845, the church had almost 300 members. That made it harder to hide all the dead bodies from their rituals. So they came up with one of their darkest ideas yet. They started selling the bodies to medical schools. Back then, schools needed dead bodies for students to learn on, but they could mostly only use criminals who'd been executed. There weren't enough bodies, so a black market grew. Body snatchers stole from graves or claimed poor people no one buried. Deacon Silas, with all his smart friends in medicine, made secret deals. He got in touch with people who sold bodies to schools in Albany, New York City, and even far-off places like Philadelphia. Church records later taken by the government showed that, from 1840 to 1845, at least 67 vessels were donated to science. That was just a fancy way of saying they sold murdered people's bodies. These sales helped the Ravencroft brothers in three big ways. First, it got rid of evidence. Second, it brought in lots of money. And third, Silas got access to advanced medical books and tools. He learned new ways to preserve bodies and ways to hurt people badly without leaving marks on the outside. This knowledge made their later horrors even worse and more controlled. By 1845, the Church of the Pure Spirit had fully changed. No longer just a strange religious group. It was now a full-on system of brainwashing, murder, and money-making, all covered up as spiritual growth. One federal agent later called it a perfect evil machine, running right out in the open, protected by religious freedom. But no matter how careful they were, rumors started to spread. Too many people had joined and then totally disappeared. Those who left the church almost never talked about it. They were too scared people wouldn't believe them. Or worse, they'd be punished. But their haunted eyes and refusal to speak only made locals more suspicious. Those whispers turned into concern, especially after something strange happened. A postal inspector named James Thornhill was looking into shady finances. He noticed weird banking stuff linked to the Church of the Pure Spirit. Large deposits of cash came in at random times. They looked more like business payments than personal bank stuff. He also saw money being sent to medical colleges in different cities, Albany, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, with vague notes saying research. Thornhill thought he was just looking into money problems. But then, he met Martha Simmons. She had run away from the church after seeing her sister's elevation in 1846. At first, she didn't want to talk. But later, she gave the first real testimony about what the church was doing. She spoke of torture rituals, dead bodies in underground rooms, and how kids were chosen for special blessings and then vanished forever. Thornhill wrote in his report, "It sounded totally insane. I would have thought she was crazy if..." Her story didn't match the money trail perfectly. He took the information to his bosses, but they didn't really act on it. Back then, churches had huge legal protection, so accusing one of murder needed a mountain of proof. Since he wasn't allowed to launch a real investigation, Thornhill kept digging in secret and started a network of people in Ravenwood who could keep an eye on the church and report back to him. One of those people was Dr. William Garrett, a doctor in Albany. He had started to feel suspicious about some of the dead bodies that were sent to him for medical study from the Church of the Pure Spirit. "Usually we get bodies from people who agreed to donate after death," Dr. Garrett later explained in court. But these bodies were different. They had injuries that happened before death. Some of the wounds had even started healing, meaning they weren't fresh. And the cause of death looked the same in many of them, signs of suffocation, and their bodies showed signs of serious stress. In 1850, Garrett secretly contacted Thornhill and shared medical reports on 7 of these strange bodies he had examined. Those reports became the first real scientific proof that something evil might be happening at the church. Still, the authorities were hesitant to go after a church without undeniable solid proof that crimes were taking place. Then finally, something unexpected happened that changed everything. In the spring of 1851, Prophet Caleb's mental health, which had been getting worse for years, hit a breaking point. Church members later testified about what happened. Caleb started having violent outbursts, yelling that spirits were coming out of the walls, and saying he could see the divine anatomy floating in the air. Even the most loyal churchgoers got scared because his sermons were becoming bizarre and terrifying. To manage the problem, Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas started keeping Prophet Caleb away from public view. They told the congregation he was in deep spiritual talks with the Spirit. But in reality, they locked him in a special room deep underground so no one would hear his screaming. This might have worked, but on the night of June 17, 1851, Prophet Caleb managed to escape. He broke out of his restraints and wandered through the tunnels until he came out in the woods behind the church property. What happened next was shocking and unforgettable. The Albany Evening Journal called it a moment of public madness that had never been seen before in that area. Naked and covered in cuts he made himself, Prophet Caleb stumbled into Ravenwood's town square, right in the middle of a public festival for the summer harvest. In front of a stunned crowd, he yelled that he was the living vessel of the pure Spirit. Then he started telling everyone in disturbing detail about the horrible rituals happening underground. He shouted, "The blood of the purified brings us closer to the divine." He claimed that 27 vessels had been emptied, and their spirits had now filled him completely. He said the underground chambers were full of holy remains, and soon everyone there would join them in glorious pain. The local police arrested him, thinking he was just a crazy man. But once they realized he was one of the Ravencroft brothers, his wild talk started to seem a lot more serious. Thornhill was told right away thanks to his connections. He rushed to Ravenwood the next day to speak with Prophet Caleb. What he found was a man completely falling apart. Caleb flipped between total silence and sudden bursts of confession. During his talks, he shared information that matched what former church members had already said in their testimonies. Most importantly, Caleb drew very detailed maps of all the underground rooms, including hidden entrances and the exact location of the Chamber of Saints. This was the big break Thornhill had been waiting for. With this new proof and Caleb's statements, he finally got the green light for an official investigation. But before the search could begin, word got out. Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas found out Caleb had been arrested and realized a search was coming. What they did next showed how cold and calculating they were. They triggered something mentioned in their records, a secret plan they called the Cleansing Flame. They quickly sent trusted members to hide or destroy the worst pieces of evidence, like financial documents and the most recent dead bodies. Then, in a bold and sneaky move, they set a controlled fire inside the church. They made sure to burn certain areas while keeping others safe, so it would look like an accident, not a cover-up. When police showed up with a search warrant on June 19th, they found a half-burned church and a bunch of church members pretending to help clean up. Elder Ezra acted totally calm and helpful. He told investigators, "It looks like God is testing us again. First with my brother's illness, and now this horrible fire. But we will rebuild. Our faith will rise from these ashes." The investigation had a rough start. The fire had damaged a lot. The main tunnel entrance was caved in, which made getting underground tough. And once they dug through and got into the tunnels, they saw the rooms had been partly flooded. Someone had rerouted water from a nearby stream on purpose. A lot of the rooms were empty, clearly cleaned out in a rush. But investigators still found enough to prove how bad things really were. In rooms the fire and flood hadn't touched, they found shackles and tools that had been altered for torture. They also found chemicals used for preserving bodies. The most horrifying discovery was the Chamber of Saints. Even after the cleanup, dozens of bodies were still inside, some skeletons, some partly preserved. Federal investigator Daniel Blackwood wrote in his report, "The scene is impossible to put into words. Bones arranged like people praying, corpses sitting up like they were in a strange church service, and tiny rooms holding the bodies of children set up like they were playing, but clearly killed in awful ways." Even veteran investigators were shaken by what they saw. Newspapers shared only a few details because of how sensitive the public was back then. But it was still enough to horrify everyone who read the news. On June 25, 1851, the Albany Evening Journal had a headline that read, "House of Worship Revealed as Charnel House. Brothers Accused of Unspeakable Acts in the Name of Religion." While officials tried to ID the victims and understand the full extent of what happened at the church, Ezra and Silas claimed they were innocent. They said Caleb had done everything in secret and that they were just as shocked as everyone else. And for a moment, that excuse almost worked. Their church was so carefully divided into roles that it seemed believable they hadn't known the full truth. But then, the final piece of evidence destroyed their lies. Under Deacon Silas's room, investigators found a hidden compartment. Inside it was a leather-bound book, a ledger. It had full records of every elevation from 1829 to 1851. It was written in Silas's own handwriting. Each entry listed names, dates, how they were killed, and what happened to their bodies, even details about which ones were sold to schools. The worst part? The book named all three brothers as being directly involved in the killings. It even noted that Elder Ezra was the one who picked who would die in each ritual. That ledger, plus Prophet Caleb's confessions and the stories of former church members, was more than enough to charge them. On July 3, 1851, Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas Ravencroft were arrested. They were charged with murder, fraud, and desecrating human remains. The trial would become one of the biggest scandals of the 1800s. Much of the truly awful evidence was kept away from the public. The government feared what it might do to people's beliefs. But the investigation kept growing, digging deeper into everything the brothers had done over the years. And the darkest secrets were still yet to come. The Church of the Pure Spirit remained hidden, waiting to be fully uncovered by those who kept digging long after the Ravencroft brothers were brought to justice. As the summer of 1851 went on, the investigation kept growing in size and horror. Authorities realized they weren't just looking at a strange cult. They had found a vast criminal network with ties to religion, medicine, and money. Ezra and Silas stayed locked up, waiting for their trial. Prophet Caleb, judged too unstable for court, was sent to the state asylum in Utica. The followers were scattered. Some ran, hoping to avoid arrest. Others stayed in Ravenwood, shocked and confused, their faith shattered by everything that came to light. Federal investigator Daniel Blackwood set up a field office in Ravenwood. From there, he led the massive operation. He pulled together evidence, old papers, witness statements, medical exams. And what he found painted a timeline of horror that went back even further than anyone had guessed. These men didn't start in Ravenwood, Blackwood wrote in a private report to Washington. There's proof they did similar things in at least 3 other places. Each time, they formed a church, attracted vulnerable people, and disappeared before anyone grew suspicious. What makes Ravenwood different? Blackwood said, isn't what they did, but how long they got away with it and how big it became. Documents found in a hidden vault under Silas's room showed the brothers had used different names in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Ohio before finally settling in New York. With each stop, they improved their methods, getting better at hiding, and more confident in their twisted beliefs. Even worse, they hadn't worked alone. Letters between Silas and people at medical schools showed some knowledge, if not full awareness, that the bodies they were getting weren't from natural deaths. One letter from 1844, sent by a famous doctor in Philadelphia, praised the church for sending such well-prepared bodies. The subjects appear to have been studied while still alive, he wrote, as if they were prepped for science. Before death, that revelation changed everything. The Ravencrofts weren't just killing for their cult's sake. They were experimenting on living people, tracking what happened to the body, then selling the corpses and the findings. They were doing early, crude scientific research, said Dr. Samuel Prescott from Albany Medical College. The wounds, the preserved tissue, the notes. It's clear they were studying how pain affects the body, how long systems can keep working under stress. Then in August, the case took a new turn. A respected doctor from Boston came forward, Dr. Jonathan Crane. Back in the 1820s, he was a student at Harvard Medical School. He remembered a strange guest lecturer named Simon Ravingwood, who shared disturbing theories about pain and religion. He said pain could open a door to spiritual experience, Dr. Crane testified. Even back then, it felt wrong. At first, he thought the man was just a strange scientist. But after reading newspaper reports about the Ravencrofts, he saw a sketch of Silas Ravencroft and instantly recognized him. Silas Ravencroft and Simon Ravingwood are the same man. That detail changed how the investigators saw everything. It meant the Church of the Pure Spirit wasn't just a religion used to justify killing. It was built from the ground up to support human experiments, a way to make torture seem holy so victims would never fight back. Digging deeper, investigators found a hidden room under Silas's living quarters. Inside were hundreds of notebooks, filled with diagrams of the human body, step-by-step procedures, and horrifying notes. The pages tracked decades of research, and as time went on, the religious talk faded. Science replaced scripture. Subject 157 stayed conscious for 47 minutes after redacted. One entry from 1848 read, "Heart kept beating for 12 minutes after that. Screamed in patterns matching earlier cases. Blood loss, 1.7 liters. Supports theory of life extension under extreme stress." When Elder Ezra was shown this evidence, he finally broke during questioning. He laughed for almost a full minute before speaking quietly to Agent Blackwood. "You don't understand anything," he said. "The Spirit has many names. Some say God, some say science. We only looked for the truth others were too afraid to find. Those people we elevated, they gave their lives for knowledge. Their pain had meaning, their deaths had purpose." That moment rocked the medical world. Colleges and doctors who had accepted specimens now faced scrutiny and shame. Everyone had to ask, how far should science go? And at what cost? Meanwhile, fall arrived. The excavation of the church grounds pushed forward. At first, investigators relied on Caleb's claim that 217 people had died. But by mid-September, that number was proven wrong. "We found the remains of at least 276 victims," Blackwood wrote. "And there are signs of more." Tests showed that the tunnels had been expanding under nearby property as the church grew. Then came another grim discovery. Not every victim had joined the church willingly. Letters from Ezra to outsiders revealed a system. They had been scouting people in nearby towns who could be taken without notice. "Red-haired Irishman passed through last Thursday," one letter read. "Would make an excellent vessel. No family, strong body, looking for work. I told him he could find a job at the Ravenwood Mill. He should arrive by Saturday." This changed the case entirely. It wasn't just brainwashed followers being killed. It was kidnapping, murder, and body selling on a large scale. A criminal machine masked by religion and science. And maybe, just maybe, other people were involved too. Just when it seemed the story couldn't get darker, a new horror came to light. If this story chills you to the bone, share it with a friend who loves these hidden histories. Click like to support our work. And subscribe because we're not done yet. Let's keep digging. Let's uncover what happened next. The final breakthrough came in October 1851 when investigators tracked down Samuel Parsons, the church's former accountant. He had worked for them from 1835 to 1849 before running away under a fake name. Now living quietly in western Massachusetts, Parsons came forward when he heard about the investigation. He was terrified but agreed to speak as long as he was guaranteed immunity. "I thought I was handling church donations," he testified. "Then I saw entries labeled specimen prep and research grants, and I knew I had to get out." Corresponded with disappearances among the congregation, Parsons said. "That's when I began keeping my own secret ledger. When Elder Ezra discovered it, he scheduled me for what he called special prayer counseling. By then, I knew what that meant. It was code for elevation. I fled that very night with only the clothes I had on." Parsons provided authorities with a wealth of detail from memory, names of medical schools that had paid for bodies and research, wealthy patrons who had unknowingly funded the Ravencrofts, crimes and church members who had helped carry out different parts of the operation. But what shook investigators most was his disclosure of a second, hidden site, a farmhouse nearly 40 miles from Ravenwood. The Ravencrofts had purchased it secretly in 1840 through an intermediary. It was used, Parsons said, for special research so disturbing that even the church's inner circle was kept in the dark. Elder Ezra called it the garden. Parsons recalled, "Only he, Silas, and 2 trusted aides ever went there. Supplies arrived once a month, medical tools, strange chemicals, chains and restraints, and sometimes people. Always at night. No one ever came back." When authorities located and entered the property, what they discovered surpassed even the horrors beneath the church. The farmhouse had been converted into a complex medical facility, each room carefully designed for different types of experimentation. Ledgers and charts documented every procedure. Subjects had been kept alive for weeks, even months, while being slowly studied, altered, and broken. The worst of it, however, was found in a second structure behind the house. A building built, not for adults, but for children. Inside were tiny cells and custom-built restraints, perfectly sized for young bodies. Documents revealed that at least 37 children ranging in age, from 4 to 16, had been taken to the garden between 1840 and 1851. This discovery ignited a national firestorm. Newspapers that had once tread carefully now printed every grisly detail. The New York Tribune led with the headline, "Monsters in Human Form. Ravencroft Brothers' Crimes Against Innocents Revealed." Public outrage exploded. Protests erupted in cities from Albany to Boston. And politicians, once silent, now demanded swift public justice. In prison, the brothers finally began to crack. Guards reported that Elder Ezra had started whispering to unseen spirits, speaking in unknown tongues. Silas, confronted with photos from the garden, attempted suicide in his cell using a shard of mirror. By the end of 1851, the case of the Ravencroft brothers was no longer just a local tragedy, it had become a national reckoning. The upcoming trial promised to reshape the boundaries of religious freedom, medical ethics, and the dark possibilities hiding behind respectable faces. But for investigator Daniel Blackwood, a new unease was growing. He had begun to suspect that the Ravencroft's power went deeper than anyone dared admit. "There are too many years, too many towns, too many victims," Blackwood wrote in his private journal that December. This didn't happen in isolation. They had help funding, protection, silence, and if they had all that, who else was part of it? He concluded with a final chilling line. "The Ravencrofts are guilty beyond measure, but I fear they were only a piece of something much larger. My question is no longer whether justice will be served, but whether we will ever know the full truth." As it turns out, Blackwood's fears were more accurate than even he could imagine, because in January 1852, the trial of the Ravencroft brothers began. And America was watching. We honored them by letting their pain shine a light on places others are too scared to go. When someone said that, a man in the courtroom gallery later found out to be Harold Winters, whose son went missing after a church service back in 1847, suddenly rushed the witness stand. He had a knife hidden on him. But court officers grabbed him before he got close to Elder Ezra. Ezra didn't even flinch or move. Just stayed calm like nothing happened. You see, Ezra said calmly, once Winters was taken away, even just hearing the truth makes people angry, especially those who can't understand it. That's always how it is when someone tries to go past what people normally believe or know. After Ezra gave his testimony, Deacon Silas said he wouldn't speak at all. His lawyer gave a short statement, saying Silas had just followed his brother's lead. They asked for some mercy because of that. Then the prosecution gave their final words, talking about how planned the brothers' crimes were, how badly the victims suffered, and how they betrayed both religion and science at the same time. The jury took less than 3 hours to make their choice guilty on every single charge for both of them. On March 10, 1852, Judge William Blackwood gave his sentence. The Ravencroft brothers were to be hanged because what they did was an insult to God, to people, and to the very idea of a moral society. The hanging was set for April 15th, but then something strange happened before that date. Prophet Caleb, who had been locked up in the Utica Asylum, died on March 20th under weird circumstances. Officially, they said he died from nervous exhaustion. But gossip spread that maybe he killed himself or was murdered by staff who found out he was connected to the case. Even stranger, on the night of April 7th, a fire started at the Albany jail where the Ravencroft brothers were being held. By the time the fire was out, 3 prisoners and 2 guards had died from smoke. At first, reports said Deacon Silas was one of the dead. They said they knew it was him because of his special rings. But Elder Ezra's body wasn't found dead or alive. Right after that, there was a huge manhunt, the biggest New York had ever seen at that time. Even the feds helped out, and wanted posters were everywhere in the Northeast. People claimed to see him as far away as Chicago and Montreal, but nobody actually caught him. Weeks passed, and people started wondering if the fire and Silas's death were as clear-cut as they seemed. The idea of the body was rushed, mostly based on stuff like rings, not what the burned body actually looked like. Some investigators, including Judge Blackwood, thought maybe neither brother died in that fire. He wrote in a secret report, "The way this happened makes it seem planned. Maybe they had help from the outside." He said maybe they used one dead body to make it look like Silas died, while the real Silas and Ezra both got away. That theory made more sense when they found out that someone had taken out nearly $30,000 from a church bank account just 2 days before the fire. The person who did it looked a lot like Jacob Thornton, a big fan of the brothers who'd vanished right after they got arrested. The creepiest part came in June 1852. A doctor in Baltimore, Dr. Edward Mitchell, was found murdered in his home, and it was super weird. He had been one of the doctors who got stuff from the Church of the Pure Spirit, though he had worked with the cops and wasn't charged. His body was found set up in the same way as those creepy church victims, and there was a note on his chest that said, "The Spirit sees all who betray its work." Then, over the next year, 2 more doctors connected to the case were killed the same way. Each body was arranged the same. Each had a note just like that first one. This made everyone scared. It felt like the brothers or their followers were hunting down anyone who helped with the investigation. By 1854, the main investigation had slowed way down. People just assumed Ezra had left the country. Now and then, there were stories of weird religious groups doing things kinda like the Church of the Pure Spirit. Some were in places like New Orleans, St. Louis, and San Francisco. But no one ever found Ezra. Judge Blackwood, who had been given new cases by then, still kept looking into the brothers on his own. He started to believe Ezra didn't just escape. He started everything again in a new place, maybe with help from a bigger group than they first thought. He wrote in his final report in 1860, "This case wasn't the end of something. It just showed us it existed." He said mixing religion, science with no ethics, and promises of amazing knowledge was too tempting to ever fully stop. He said the darkness just went into hiding, still working where we couldn't see it. And turns out, he was right. For years after, there were little news stories about groups that acted just like the Church of the Pure Spirit. They popped up, stayed a while, then vanished, leaving weird disappearances behind. No one ever proved Ezra had anything to do with them. But it felt like his influence was still around. The biggest clue came in 1862, 10 years after everything happened. A small church near the Massachusetts-Vermont border called itself the Sanctuary of Divine Understanding. Cops checked it out after people heard strange sounds and saw lights. The place was empty, but in a secret basement, they found signs of recent rituals, the same kind the Ravencroft brothers used. Even more chilling, they found a journal. Experts said the handwriting matched Ezra's. The last page was written 3 days before they found the place. It said, "The work continues as it must. Each vessel brings understanding. Each elevation gets us closer to the final truth. 100 years from now, when everything is known, people will see our sacrifice was the start of a new age. The Spirit is patient, and so must we be." No one knows if that was Ezra's goodbye note or if he disappeared again. No one ever saw him for sure after the Albany fire. So his fate became one of America's biggest unsolved mysteries. The official investigation ended in 1862 when they found that abandoned church and the journal. The Civil War was going on, so the government, stretched thin, called the case closed, even though they had no real proof about Ezra's fate. All the evidence from Ravenwood and the other sites was put in a locked archive at the Department of Justice. Only people with special clearance could look at it. The stuff included journals, ritual tools, money records, and drawings of body parts, but no one really studied it for years. Maybe because it made the government uncomfortable. In towns hurt by the Ravencrofts, healing took a long time. Ravenwood never got over what happened. The state took the church land, knocked down the buildings, and left it empty. Many people moved away, not wanting to live with the shame of that history. Families who lost someone to the elevations started a support group. It later grew into something bigger, helping people from other places with similar stories. First it was called the Assembly of Reconciliation, later, just the Assembly. They worked to stop religious groups that crossed the line into abuse. But maybe the biggest change came in medicine. After people found out that big hospitals and schools had used the brothers' victims without knowing, it kicked off the first real national talk about where bodies for research and learning came from. The ethical rules of science really changed after this. In 1855, the American Medical Association made its first official rule. They said all bodies used in research or teaching had to be legally gotten and documented. Then in 1858, some states passed tougher laws to keep medical schools and labs in check. Dr. William Harrison helped expose how the Ravencrofts were linked to medical places. He became a big voice for changing the system. In 1860 he wrote a paper saying science must follow moral rules. He said knowledge gained by hurting others is dirty from the start, and science without a heart just turns into horror pretending to be progress. The brothers mixed religion and fake science in a way that showed big cracks in the system. Cracks where faith, science, and power meet, ones that America would keep struggling with even long after people forgot the details of the case. Rumors about Elder Ezra still being alive kept going through the rest of the 1800s. People claimed they saw him in California mining camps, in spiritual groups in New Orleans, even at medical talks in Europe. No one proved anything, but the story showed how much his creepy charm stuck in people's minds. More real than the rumors were signs his followers were still out there. Between 1865 and 1890, cops found at least 7 little religious groups, all with pieces of the Church of the Pure Spirit's beliefs and ways. None were as big or wild as the original, but it proved the brothers' ideas had spread past their control. The biggest one was found in 1879 in the countryside of Missouri. A preacher calling himself Brother Elijah started a group that believed people could grow spiritually by going through pain. Cops looked into weird reports and found ritual tools and journals, and they mentioned the Ravencroft teachings directly. Brother Elijah turned out to be Thomas Whitfield, someone who had been in the church's inner circle. He killed himself instead of letting them arrest him. The last solid piece of the Ravencroft story came in 1899. Someone donated a locked, iron box to Harvard's medical library. Inside were journals, body drawings, and lab notes from 1852 to 1898. They checked the writing and found that the newest stuff was written by Elder Ezra himself, though his writing looked shaky, like someone very old. The last thing he wrote was dated December 31st, 1898. It said, "As this century ends, my work in this body is done. Old age did what the law couldn't. I go now to join the pure spirit, knowing the seeds we planted have started to grow. Others will keep going, find new ways to do the great work. The pain was needed, the knowledge remains, the spirit lives on." Some say that letter was real. If it was, that means Ezra lived to be 115 rare, but not totally impossible. Whether it was real or not, the journals had lab methods and notes that actually helped real science in the early 1900s. Even with their awful ways, parts of the brothers' work had leaked into regular medicine. When Harvard saw what was inside, they locked it up right away. In 1902, after talking to the government, they gave the whole box to a special archive that stayed secret until 1972. Then, only a few scholars were allowed to see it, and only to study the history of ethics in medicine. The land where the Church of the Pure Spirit once stood stayed empty until 1923. The New York State made it a restricted area. They put up fences and signs saying no trespassing. Locals said the land was cursed. People talked about weird lights, strange noises, and a heavy feeling of dread near the place. In 1967, a university team used new tools to dig up parts that had never been searched before. They found more human remains in hidden tunnels. The number of victims went over 400, way more than the 276 in the records. Even scarier, they found a sealed room with very well-kept documents. They looked like plans to grow the church into more places, maybe even in other countries. It seemed like Ezra had bigger dreams and maybe kept trying after he got away. Even now, over 160 years later, people still feel the impact of what the brothers did. In religion classes, they're used as a warning, showing how charm, slow creep of bad behavior, and people's hunger for meaning can lead to horror. In medicine, their story is a key example of why science needs morals. In crime studies, they're one of the first known cases of killers hiding behind respected roles in society. But to the people and families they hurt, the Ravencrofts are more than a case. They're a deep wound that never really healed. Families of the victims still gather once a year at a small memorial in Albany put up in 1902. It has just one line on it: "For those lost to darkness, that their suffering not be forgotten." The questions that haunted Judge Blackwood in 1852 still hang in the air. How did the brothers mix religion and fake science so well? Who else helped them or knew what they were doing? And maybe the scariest, how much of their ideas are still hiding in plain sight today? The real horror in their story isn't just what they did. It's realizing this wasn't just a freak event. It's a warning about what happens when charm, power, and belief can erase our basic sense of right and wrong. In the thick woods Of upstate New York, where the church once stood, the land is still empty. You can still see the marks where the buildings were, like the earth refuses to forget. Locals say that even today, when the night is quiet, that place feels wrong. Like something under the ground is still there, eating up sound, light, and warmth, still hungry for the pain it once fed on. This story shows just how thin the line is between normal life and something much darker, when people in charge twist faith and science to do terrible things. So what do you think? Do you believe the whole story came out? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you like this creepy tale and want more like it, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and share it with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next one.